After 12 years of running my father's company, I finally made it worth $75 million. At a family dinner celebrating our success, my dad looked at me and said, smiling, "Your brother will take over now." My heart sank, but I smiled back. The next morning at work, everything changed. I still remember the way my father smiled that night, his hand resting proudly on my brother's shoulder as if he had already made up his mind long before speaking the words that would shatter everything. I felt my stomach drop, but years of practice kept my face composed. I smiled back as if his words didn't pierce straight through me, as if they weren't unraveling 12 years of my life's work in an instant. This wasn't just a family dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration, a moment meant to honor everything we had built. Everything I had built. But my father had already decided. Dylan would be taking over. Not me. And in that moment, I realized something. They had underestimated me, and tomorrow morning, they would learn exactly what that meant. The dining room was filled with the clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of conversations between extended family and close business associates. My father had started Caldwell Logistics Group. When I was just a child, a modest logistics business that barely stayed afloat in its early years. I grew up watching him struggle to keep it alive, working late nights, sacrificing family vacations, always chasing one more contract to make ends meet. I was 24 when I first asked to join the company, fresh out of business school, armed with ideas and ambition. My father had looked at me across his desk, skepticism written all over his face. "Morgan, this is a tough business," he had said. "It's not really a place for women. The clients, the warehouse managers, the truck drivers, they expect to deal with men." I had felt the sting of his words, but refused to show it. "Then let me prove them wrong," I had replied. He had reluctantly agreed, giving me the smallest, most impossible account to manage. A regional contract everyone said was dead in the water. I closed that deal in 6 weeks. I remember the look on his face when I walked into his office with the signed contract. Surprise. Maybe a flicker of respect, but never quite belief. Not the kind that mattered. Over the next 12 years, I transformed Caldwell Logistics Group from a struggling $5 million regional firm into a national powerhouse. I expanded our operations into 6 new markets, secured multi-million-dollar contracts with Fortune 500 companies, integrated cutting-edge tracking technology that revolutionized our efficiency. What was once a small, nearly bankrupt company now stood as an industry leader worth $75 million. And my brother Dylan? He had spent those same 12 years hopping from one failed venture to another. First, it was a tech startup that burned through investor money in 8 months. Then a craft brewery that closed before it even opened. Then some cryptocurrency scheme that I didn't even bother asking about. Dylan wasn't interested in logistics. He wasn't interested in operations. He was interested in the idea of success without any of the work required to achieve it. But tonight, none of that mattered. My father had made his choice. I glanced across the table at my mother, Catherine. Her eyes met mine briefly, an unreadable expression flickering across her face. Unlike my father, she had always seen the effort I put in. She knew what this company meant to me, but she wouldn't interfere. She never did. In this family, my father's word was law. Dylan met my gaze from across the table, a smirk barely hidden at the corner of his lips. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just my father's decision. Dylan had been working toward this, positioning himself carefully, playing the role of the dutiful son who had finally found his calling. And my father, ever the traditionalist, saw no flaw in his logic. A son should inherit the empire. A daughter's efforts were always considered temporary, a footnote in history, no matter how hard she fought to prove otherwise. I raised my wine glass, my hand steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "To Dylan," I said, my voice smooth, controlled. The guests raised their glasses, oblivious to what was really happening. My father grinned with that same unwavering confidence, completely unaware that his choice had set something in motion, something he couldn't stop. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made for Caldwell Logistics Group. The late nights when everyone else had gone home, the missed birthdays, the broken relationship with someone who couldn't understand why I worked so hard. The weekends spent in negotiations instead of living my life. I had given everything for this company, and now they expected me to simply step aside. I remembered a moment from childhood. I must have been 10 years old. My father had taken Dylan to a business conference, just the two of them. I had begged to go, but he had patted my head and said, "This isn't for you, sweetheart. Stay home with your mother." I had watched them leave, feeling invisible. That feeling had never really gone away. Until now. By 3 in the morning, I was in my home office, my fingers moving quickly across my keyboard. Every contract, every share agreement, every executive document. I knew the inner workings of this company better than anyone. Better than my father, certainly better than Dylan. While my father had been busy with public appearances and Dylan had been busy pretending to learn the business, I had been doing something else entirely. I had been securing control. I pulled up the shareholder agreements, the ones my father had signed without reading too carefully. The capital investment from 2017 when the company desperately needed expansion funds. The legal settlement from 2019 when I had personally resolved a lawsuit that could have bankrupted us. Each time, shares had been transferred. Small percentages that added up to something my father had never bothered to calculate. I did the math one more time, just to be certain. 35% original stake, 15% from the 2017 investment, 10% from the 2019 settlement, 60% total. Majority shareholder? Dylan thought he was walking into an easy transition, that by next week his name would be on the office door, his position secured. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this company wasn't my father's to give away anymore. It was mine. And tomorrow morning, I would make sure they understood that. At exactly 8:45 in the morning, I stepped into Caldwell Logistics Group headquarters, just like I had for the past 12 years. The same walls, the same polished floors, the same hum of efficiency as employees settled into their routines. But today was different. Today, I wasn't walking into my office. I was walking into a battlefield. The reception area was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. The employees knew. The whispers had already started spreading through the building like wildfire. News of my father's announcement at dinner had reached them. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked past, hesitant expressions, avoiding direct eye contact, unsure of where their loyalty should lie. I didn't acknowledge them. I walked with confidence, my heels clicking against the marble floors, my posture unwavering, my face composed. Never let them see you shaken. Never let them see doubt. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. I entered my office and shut the door behind me. I had precisely 15 minutes before my father and Dylan arrived, thinking they would step into their new positions as CEO and heir apparent. 15 minutes before everything they had planned would crumble in front of them. I sat at my desk, inhaling deeply, then powered on my computer. The screen illuminated with the documents I had prepared the night before. Confidential contracts, shareholder agreements, legal filings. Everything they had never thought to look at, everything they had assumed didn't matter. I pulled up my ownership records, my hands hovering over the keyboard for a second before I clicked on the file labeled Executive Shareholders Agreement. And then I waited. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a sharp knock at my door. I didn't bother responding. The door swung open and in walked my father and Dylan, both exuding confidence. My father's was inborn, the kind that came from decades of running his own company. Dylan's was carefully manufactured, the kind that came from believing he had already won. My father strode in like a king surveying his kingdom, while Dylan, dressed in an expensive navy suit, gave me a smug, triumphant grin. It took everything in me not to laugh. "Morgan," my father said in his usual authoritative voice, as if he were doing me a favor by acknowledging me. "I assume you're aware of the transition happening today." Transition. Interesting choice of words. "I'm aware," I said smoothly, leaning back in my chair. I glanced at Dylan, whose smirk only widened. "Good," my father continued, nodding as if we were all in agreement. "Dylan will be stepping in as the new CEO. We'll need you to help with the handover. Get him familiar with the operations before you officially move on." I arched an eyebrow. "Move on?" I echoed, feigning confusion. Dad, I think you're mistaken about something. His face twitched in irritation. He was used to my compliance, my ability to quietly fall in line. He wasn't prepared for this. Morgan, he said, his voice tight, as if speaking to a child, this isn't up for debate. We've already made the decision. I smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. Oh, I know, Dad. And to add, I said softly, the thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision. Dylan let out a low scoff, shaking his head. Morgan, don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the remote control on my desk and pressed a button. The large screen on my office wall lit up with a document, the same one I had been reviewing earlier. Executive Shareholders Agreement, signed August 17th, 2015. Signatories, Morgan Caldwell, Richard Caldwell, Dylan Caldwell. My father's face paled slightly. I turned to Dylan. Do you even know what this document is? He crossed his arms, shifting uncomfortably. A shareholders agreement, he guessed. I nodded. Yes. And do you know what it says? I tapped the screen, highlighting a crucial clause. This document was drafted when Caldwell Logistics Group was restructuring. It clearly states that any transfer of executive power, such as appointing a new CEO, requires the approval of all majority shareholders. I met my father's eyes directly. And I, Dad, hold 60% of the company's shares. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. Dylan stepped forward, snatching the document from the screen display. That's impossible, he muttered, scanning the pages. Actually, it's very possible, I said smoothly. You see, over the years, while you were busy failing at every startup you touched, Dylan, and Dad was busy playing the role of business patriarch, I was doing something else. I was securing my place. I turned back to my father. Remember when you needed capital for expansion in 2017? You signed over an additional 15% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. And in 2019, when we had that legal battle that nearly destroyed us, another 10% was transferred under my name as collateral, which you never bothered reclaiming. That, plus my original 35% stake, makes me the majority shareholder. My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Dylan was panicking. You have to be lying, he spat. I pulled out a second document from my desk drawer. This is the most recent legal filing with the state. Want to verify it? I slid it across the desk. Dylan snatched the paper and scanned it, his face draining of color with each passing second. You can't do this, he stammered, turning to our father. Dad, tell her she can't do this. My father remained silent, because he knew. I had legally outmaneuvered him, and there was nothing he could do about it. I exhaled slowly, standing up. I'm not firing you, Dylan, I said, my voice even. I wouldn't want to force you into the real job market, but you will report to me, and you will work under my leadership. Otherwise, I gestured toward the door, you're free to leave. Dylan turned to my father, eyes pleading, desperate for him to fix this. But for the first time in his life, my father had no answer, no way to undo what I had done. Because this wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The silence stretched on. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and controlled. So that's it then. You're just taking everything. I met his gaze without flinching. Taking everything? I repeated. Dad, I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every expansion, every innovation, I made it happen. While Dylan was busy failing upwards, I was keeping this company alive. So no, I'm not taking anything. I leaned forward slightly. I'm just keeping what's already mine. My father stared at me as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps he never had. You're making a mistake, Morgan, he said finally. Families should stick together. Do you really want to burn this bridge? I felt a sharp pang at his words, but I didn't let it show. Dad, I said slowly, you burned this bridge the moment you made your decision without me. His lips pressed into a thin line. We can find a solution that works for everyone. I tilted my head slightly. Oh, I agree. That's why I'm offering you both a choice. I turned to Dylan. You can stay in the company. You'll take on an advisory role with limited authority. Your salary will be generous, but you will answer to me. I paused. Or you can walk away. I'll buy out your shares at market value. You can take the money and find a new project. My father scoffed. You're acting like you hold all the cards. I smiled. I do. Dylan stormed out first, slamming the door behind him. Good riddance. My father lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, he gave a slow nod. You've changed, he said quietly. I met his gaze. No, Dad. I finally stopped pretending. Then he left. And I was alone. For the first time in 12 years, my office felt empty. No phone calls from my father. No passive-aggressive emails from Dylan. Just silence. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant the battle had begun. I knew my father wouldn't walk away quietly. And Dylan, he would fight tooth and nail to reclaim what he thought was his birthright. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. It had just begun. By the next morning, I could already feel the undercurrent of unease within the company. Employees who had greeted me with confidence last week now seemed hesitant, as if afraid to pick a side. A few department heads avoided eye contact in the hallways. I knew what was happening. My father and Dylan were working the Whisper Network. Old family friends, board members, senior executives. They were sowing doubt, painting me as cold, ruthless, disloyal. Dylan especially had taken on the role of the wounded son, betrayed by his own sister. I could imagine him now, sitting in some high-end restaurant, fake sorrow in his voice as he told our investors how I had stolen the company out from under him. And my father, he wouldn't need to say much at all. Just a heavy sigh, a shaking of his head, the carefully placed words. I only ever wanted the best for my children. It was calculated, and it was dangerous. Because if they managed to turn my board members and top executives against me, they could push me out of my own company, or at least make my leadership impossible. I wasn't about to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an emergency executive meeting. As I stepped into the boardroom, I felt the tension in the air. Half of the room avoided my gaze. The other half watched me too closely, waiting for me to slip. I took my seat at the head of the table. My seat. Let's not waste time, I said, my voice even. I know there have been conversations behind closed doors over drinks in hushed voices. I let my eyes scan the room, pausing on each person just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. I also know that some of you are wondering if my leadership is sustainable. A few people tensed. No one spoke. I tapped my fingers against the polished wood table. Let's clear that up now. I pulled up a presentation on the screen behind me. Numbers, data, facts. I built this company from a struggling regional business to a $75 million industry leader. Over the last 5 years under my leadership, we've seen a 300% increase in revenue and expanded into 6 new markets. I turned to the CFO. Paul, do we have a single financial indicator suggesting this company is in trouble under my leadership? Paul Jennings hesitated, then shook his head. No, in fact, projections show another 20% growth in the next quarter. I nodded. So let's be honest about what's happening here. I leaned forward. My father and brother aren't upset because the company is struggling. They aren't upset because I'm failing as a leader. They're upset because they expected me to step aside and let Dylan take over, regardless of qualifications, regardless of results. The room was silent. Then I dropped the reel. Bomb. I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 24 hours, offered incentives to push for my resignation. I tilted my head slightly. If anyone here would like to disclose those conversations now, this is your chance. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Then, after a long pause, one of the senior executives cleared his throat. I received a call, he admitted. From your father. He said he was considering making an official appeal to the board. I nodded, unsurprised. And did he offer anything in return for your support? A pause. then a slow nod. There it is. I exhaled, standing up. My father built this company, I said. I won't discredit that, but I took it further than he ever could have, and I will not allow him to manipulate it from the outside. I let my voice drop slightly, controlled, dangerous. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. I gathered my papers, looking each executive in the eye. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control, now is the time to make your move. Silence. No one moved. Good, I said. I turned and walked out, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping my company. This was about making sure they never thought they could take it from me again. That night, I made my own call. Not to a board member, not to an investor, but to an old friend in investigative journalism. I have something for you, I said, but you'll need to move fast. An hour later, I sent over documents, emails, financial reports, internal records, evidence that Caldwell Logistics Group, under my father's leadership years ago, had engaged in questionable business practices, ones I had spent the last decade quietly cleaning up. Hidden debts, accounting irregularities, vendor kickbacks that skirted the edge of legality. The story broke within 24 hours. Behind the scenes at Caldwell Logistics, a legacy of hidden debts and financial cover-ups. The article was brutal. It praised my leadership for fixing the company's financial health. It criticized my father's mismanagement from the past, and most importantly, it proved that I was the only reason Caldwell Logistics Group had survived. Just like that, the narrative changed. The board stopped doubting me. The investors stopped hesitating. And my father, he had nowhere to hide. 2 days later, my father finally called me. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Morgan, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. Do we? Silence, then finally a sigh. You didn't have to do that. I let out a small laugh. Neither did you. This company was supposed to be a legacy, he said. For the family, for both of you. I felt a familiar pang, a tiny, foolish part of me that had once wanted that too, but not anymore. Dad, I said quietly, if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me. Another long silence, then he asked, almost reluctantly, what happens now? I exhaled slowly. Now? Now I make sure you can never touch my company again. The war was over. My father had lost. Dylan had disappeared. And I had won. But as I sat in my office that evening, staring out over the city skyline, I felt no satisfaction. No triumph, just emptiness. I had spent 12 years fighting for Caldwell Logistics Group, building it, protecting it, making it stronger than ever before. And yet the cost of that victory weighed heavier than I had expected, because while I had secured my position, I had lost something else along the way. My family. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing had changed, but everyone knew the truth. The whispers had stopped, the doubt had faded. I was no longer just Morgan Caldwell, the CEO. I was Morgan Caldwell, the woman who had outmaneuvered her father and brother and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Some feared me, and some still waited for me to fall. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met in the conference room for what would be our final discussion. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of what had happened had finally settled on his shoulders. I waited for him to speak first. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I'm retiring, he said simply. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had expected this. I'll sell my remaining shares, he continued. I'll keep a small percentage as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore. I studied him carefully. And Dylan? His jaw tightened. He's gone. Took the buyout. He won't be back. A part of me had known it would end this way. Dylan had never been strong enough to fight his own battles. Once it was clear he had lost, he had done what he always did. He ran. Still, hearing it out loud made something inside me ache. Not regret, not guilt, just the finality of it all. I nodded. Understood. My father exhaled, rubbing his temple as if he had a headache. Then, after a long pause, he said something I never expected. I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I found that I didn't need it anymore. 1 week later, I had a conversation I hadn't expected. My mother, Catherine, called and asked to meet for lunch. We sat in a quiet restaurant, the kind of place where serious conversations happened. I'm proud of you, she said simply, her hands folded on the table. I looked at her, surprised. I always knew you were the right choice, she continued. Your father, he couldn't see it. He was too stuck in his ways, too traditional. But I saw it. I'm sorry I never fought for you. But I'm proud you fought for yourself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than cold determination. A brief moment of warmth, of connection. Thank you, I said softly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Make it yours, Morgan. Make it something he never could have built. And that's exactly what I did. A month later, Caldwell Logistics Group looked nothing like it had before. The old board members who had aligned themselves with my father and Dylan were gone. The executives who had questioned my leadership were replaced. The company had always been strong under my guidance, but now it was truly mine. And with that control came a new vision. I introduced initiatives my father had always rejected, modernized systems he had called unnecessary, expanded into industries he had been too cautious to explore. Within 6 months, profits soared. Within a year, we had crossed the $100 million mark. I closed a massive deal with a national shipping consortium, the kind of contract my father had once said was impossible for a company our size. When the papers were signed, I sat alone in my office, allowing myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not because I had beaten my father, but because I had proven to myself what I was capable of. A year after everything had happened, I met my father for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since his retirement. He looked different, quieter. He wasn't angry anymore, just accepting. I read about the latest deal you closed, he said over his drink. It was a smart move. I smirked slightly. I know. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no tension between us anymore. No war left to fight. Only the simple, undeniable truth. He had tried to push me aside, and I had proved him wrong. He lifted his glass. To Caldwell Logistics Group, he said. This time, when I clinked my glass against his, I didn't feel anger or resentment. Only peace. Because I had already won. And I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, overlooking the city that I built my empire in, I think about the lessons this journey has taught me. That family can be your biggest enemy. That loyalty is a currency, not a guarantee. That power is never given, it's taken. But most importantly, that sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking validation and build something so strong that they can never ignore you again. I have no regrets. Caldwell Logistics Group is mine now, and I intend to make sure no one ever forgets it. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or overlooked? Subscribe for more stories of people who refused to back down and claimed what was rightfully theirs.